fellow Toastmasters, don't have any excuse. I don't have any excuse. Like Neil said, my objective tonight is not to persuade you to do something that I want you to do, but to persuade you to do whatever it is that you really, really, really want to do, to follow your dream. There's no excuses. I'm going to cover a few excuses that are used a lot, that are common. The first one is, I can't afford it. You know, there's a lot of ways to get around that one if you're really passionate about something. If you're working, you can start saving your money. Whether you're working or not, maybe you can borrow the money. Maybe. Or you can, if you want to do something that's going to benefit other people or make the world a better place to live in, you can have a fundraiser. Be creative. If you're like Brandon, you have a good chance of winning the lottery. If you're like me, you probably should try to find a way to do what you want to do for a little or no money. I'll give you one example. I'm going to try to cut this story short. I got up here a couple of years ago, and I realized I was 60-something, and I'd never seen the Pacific Ocean. Now, I don't know why that was important to me at the time, but it was. And so I decided that I was going to find out a way to do it. I didn't have a job. I didn't have much money. I got on the internet, and I found out that it was actually possible to connect with local buses from Seattle to the Pacific. The only hitch was that the bus went through a lot of small towns, and if I missed one connection, I might be stranded overnight someplace, some strange place. Well, I decided to do it anyway. Martha didn't want me to go alone, so she decided to take the trip with me. And it worked out perfectly. Maybe it could have worked out otherwise, but we reached the Pacific Ocean. We started before daylight. We reached the Pacific Ocean late afternoon. We checked into a hostel. We walked a couple of blocks to the Pacific Ocean. And it was perfect timing because I got to see the sunset over the Pacific Ocean. It was beautiful. Do you have a dream? Another excuse that people use is, I don't have time. I'm not even going to deal with that very long. All I'll tell you to do, if you think you don't have time, sit down at your computer or sit down with a pen and piece of paper and decide and figure out what it is you do with your time. And make time. Because if it's something you're passionate about, you can make time to do what it is you want to do. The third excuse that people, some in here, most of us are middle-aged, if you aren't middle-aged or older, is that I'm too old. I'm going to use two examples here. If you think you're too old, you haven't heard about Hazel. She's known as Hurricane Hazel. And she's 89 years old, and she was just elected for her 12th term. You heard me right, 12th term as the mayor of a large city in Ontario, Canada. And my other example, now sometimes people say I have a handicap, is Helen Keller. And why am I using her as an example? Because we both had scarlet fever. She had scarlet fever when she was 18 months old and went totally blind and deaf. I had scarlet fever when I was 8 years old, but luckily they had penicillin then and they treated it. So I just went deaf in my left ear and have a partial loss in my right ear. But what's more amazing about Helen Keller, who would have, told Helen Keller she could be a writer or a public speaker, but she was both. She traveled all over the world doing public speaking. Finally, the very last excuse I'm going to mention is something I heard this week. There was a lady I was talking to about Toastmasters, and she said, I could never do that. Why is it that we decide that we can't do something automatically if we've never done it before? In my opinion, it goes back to the very first words that we probably heard. It's a boy. It's a girl. Soon after that, if they already hadn't, they gave you a name. Then they started telling you what you could do and what you couldn't do. And then teachers and counselors carried this process forward. But it's really time to be all that we can be, not what somebody else tells us. Not if somebody tells you who you are and what you can do, who gives them, what qualifies them to do this anyway? So I would just encourage you tonight to put all this aside, to follow your dreams, to be all that you can be, to break out of that box that's been built around you. There's no excuse.
Thank you, Becky. 1 minute for your evaluations.